discussing keeping your freshwater and your freshwater tank clean and fresh on a small liveaboard boat. And a special thank you to those who have already liked and subscribed to this channel. And I also want to give a super thank you to those who gave me a super thanks. It's continued support from viewers like you that keep the creation of this video series going. If you haven't done so already, then please remember to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos in this series. A lot of people have asked about this one, and the answer isn't quite as easy as you think. Some thought has to be put into it. Obviously, every liveaboard has to keep some fresh water on board. Even if you have a water maker, you still need to store some fresh water in a tank. Now, there are two problems with fresh water. First is how to get it, and that usually involves either hauling it or using a hose at a marina. If you have the space, money, and extra electricity, then you can get a water maker. But however you get your fresh water, you will have the second problem, and that's what we're focusing on today. That is keeping your fresh water clean and fresh. And at the end of this video, I will explain what I believe is to be the best way to clean your tank. Now, there are some self-cleaning tanks on the market, but I have never seen one small enough to use on anything other than a super yacht, so I'm not going to discuss those today. A lot of people make the false presumption that you can store water indefinitely, as water itself doesn't have an expiration date. But if you've tasted water that's sat in a tank for a while, you know this just is not the case. The first thing we need to talk about is the tank itself. One issue that people have is they simply do not store the water in the correct type of tank. I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but if you want to keep your water fresh for as long as possible, then you have to use storage tanks that have been made for storing fresh water for long periods of time. Depending on the type of plastic which is used for the storage tank, you might find that the plastic is fairly porous, which means that it will absorb some additives and chemicals. Even a lot of small bacteria and parasites could still be found in the storage tank. If it wasn't made for storing water for a long period of time, such as using a modified camping water tank, the water will eventually become contaminated. I know on most boats the freshwater tank is hidden away in a non-used space, and this is actually a good thing. For example, I was looking at one gentleman's boat and he had mounted a clear tank under a settee so he could see the water. His idea was this way he could see the water levels and if any dirt etc. had contaminated the tank. This sounds good in theory, but the problem with this is now that sunshine can reach the water, and with sunshine comes algae growth. Although some algae is always present in water tanks, no matter what you do, they will bloom if they get enough sunshine. A lot of people believe that as long as the tank is sealed, algae cannot bloom. This simply is not true. Water tanks are usually white in color, but even if it isn't see-through, white lets the sun shine through. Fresh water is best kept in a cool, very dark place. Yes, that's what I said, cool. This can be a real issue on a boat floating around in the tropics or even on a hot summer day. The best you can do in most cases is just make sure the area where it is mounted is well ventilated. A hot tank will raise the pH level of the water, which can make your water taste bitter. It also increases the magnesium carbonate buildup in your hoses and faucets. If you have the money and the electricity, then I highly recommend you get a UV water purifier. This way you will not have to use chlorine or bleach, which alters the taste of the water. UV water purifiers not only kill bacteria, but it also do not change the taste or even the pH level of the water. The UV light alters the DNA of the microbes and parasites, which not only kills them, but it also stops them from reproducing entirely. Just keep in mind that these UV water purifiers work best if you store your water correctly, so don't expect miracles if you do not store your water properly. If you're filling your tank by hose, you should consider simply putting an inline filter on the hose similar to the one RVs use. And speaking of filters, it's always a good idea to place a filter between your tank and the faucet. And always make sure you have the area around your fill valve clean and free from debris. Oops, I mean the freshwater fill valve. Okay, so now we have to discuss chemicals to keep your water fresh. If you've ever gone to a swimming pool and the water smelled like chlorine, then you've probably thought the water must be extra clean as they probably put too much chlorine in the water. The truth is, what you're smelling is called pool smell. This is the chemical reaction from the chlorine reacting with urine, sweat, and oils. And no, it doesn't mean the water is clean. So basically, if your water tank smells of chlorine, you either put in too much chlorine product or the water isn't properly cleaned. There are a lot of chlorine-based water treatment products. All of them have different ratios of chlorine in them, and all of them have a recommended dose. and you should follow them accordingly. Adding more doesn't make the water cleaner. You can also use bleach to keep the water fresh. Just do not use both chlorine product and bleach in the same water tank, as this will spoil the water. Bleach is fairly similar to chlorine, as it'll kill the algae, although you should always use the recommended dosage, especially if you're planning on using the water for cooking or drinking. One more way that I've heard of that is getting more popular is using denture cleaning tablets. I haven't tried this myself, but from what I read, it does seem completely safe. A lot of people who get a new storage tank simply fill it up with water, and then they wonder why the water smells bad or algae is growing in the water after just a couple weeks. The problem is that during manufacturing, storing, and shipping, the water tank might get contaminated with chemicals, algae, and bacteria. This is even more problematic if you bought the storage tank from a store where a lot of people are touching the tank. You should always clean your new tank before you fill it with water. One more piece of advice. If you're planning on doing large crossings or going a long period without refilling your fresh water, instead of using a very large water tank on board, the best practice is to have multiple separate water tanks. This way, if something happens and your water gets contaminated or it leaks out, then you're not in as much trouble. You'll still have a second tank that is still clean. Another good idea is, if you have multiple tanks, is to have a backup way of removing the water from the tanks. This way you still might be able to use the contaminated water depending on what's in it, but you can use it for cleaning, etc., and keep the clean tank for drinking and cooking. It's the not putting all your eggs in the same basket way of thinking. Okay, so now what I personally believe is the best way to clean your tank properly. Even though there's a lot of products on the market specifically for this, they are mostly chlorine or bleach based. So I just prefer to use plain old bleach. It's a lot cheaper and does the same job. You absolutely need to make sure, however, that you're using unscented bleach and you never ever use color safe. Now, the first thing you need to do is to empty all the water from your tanks, hoses, hot water heater, etc. Once they're empty, turn off the pumps. Next, you'll have to calculate how much bleach to use. For this, you'll need to know the size of your tank. If you don't already know the size of your tank, a quick way to find out is just to measure the tank and use this formula. Length times width times height. This gives you the cubic feet. Then times that by 7.47. This will give you the gallons. The formula for how much bleach is simply 1 ounce of bleach for every 8 gallons of water. If your tank has a low drain point and you've used it to empty the tank, make sure you close it again before continuing. Never ever add bleach directly to your freshwater tank. First, you need to dilute it in about a gallon of water. Get a pail or whatever, mix a gallon of water with the bleach, then use a funnel to add it back to your freshwater tank. Next, fill the tank completely with potable water and pump it through the system. Don't forget, if your system empties into a gray water tank as opposed to overboard, to empty the gray water tank as well so the bleach doesn't damage any of your components. It is advised that you should clean your storage tank once every 6 months to a year. The more often you do it, the fresher your water will be. If I missed anything, or if you have any thoughts or ideas about this subject or ideas for future subjects that I have not covered, please let me know in the comments below. I absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video series on living aboard a small boat. If you have, then please subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Also, I included links to all the past videos in the description below. Thank you very much.